Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Top Cut breakdown video. Today we have two events to go over, a PPG IRL event and a Carta Magica online webcam half case tournament. Cool stuff to look at for week 2 of the Set 13 Supreme Rivalry release. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to prep for competitive events just like we're going to talk about today, make sure to use the Patreon down in the description below. Sign up there, check out the articles I post there, see where my head's at competitively. You can also inquire about some coaching if you're interested in that. That being said, let's get started. Alright, so firstly, we're going to look at the PPG Miami 2021 event. We have roughly 30 players, and it was an IRL event, best of 3. So winning the tournament, we have King Vegeta, then we have 2 Invoker, 2 King Piccolo, a lot of red in this top 8 here, 1 Mechikabura, 1 Mecha Frieza, and 1 OG Broly. So let's break it down deck by deck. Alright, like I said before, lots and lots of red here. From week 1, we saw that King Vegeta is a very strong newcomer. I think anyone that was testing the set leading up to Supreme Rivalry's release could kind of, tell that and figure that out. The deck is really strong. I do like to compare King Vegeta and King Piccolo. Not that they do the exact same thing, but I think they both kind of fit in that red mid-range category of the format. I think King Vegeta definitely teeters more towards aggressive mid-range, and King Piccolo definitely teeters more towards defensive mid-range. So it's pretty cool that there's those two different styles depending on, what you want to do as a player. And I should also preface this that, being down in PPG, even though this was a smaller event, we have a lot of the best players in the game down in the Florida area, right? So we know this is a really high level of competition. So even though it was on the smaller side, I do want to say that I put a decent amount of stake into the results here, just to kind of preface that. There is also some Florida bias. We'll talk about that in just a second with Invoker. But anyways, back to King Vegeta and King Piccolo. Obviously, decks are both really strong. King Piccolo not dethroned in any way, shape, or fashion. I'm going to go ahead and say that red is probably the strongest color, at least at this point in the Set 13 meta. And the reason I say that is because it was coming off of Set 12 being very arguably the best color in the meta. The top 3 colors being red, black, and yellow. Yellow pretty much being carried by Mecha Frieza, a little bit of Sin here and there. In black, you've got Vegex and Dark Broly, but red just offers the biggest group of high tier decks, right? You've got King Piccolo and now King Vegeta sitting at the top. You've got Launch, you've got Red Broly, you've got these decent rogue / tier 2 decks that can do very well. Red just seems like the best overall colors. You got a lot of great answer cards. Of course, you have your Violent Rays. Of course, you have your Topo. And now if you're playing Red Sands, you have King Vegeta's Imposing Presence, which I've honestly been thinking about. I think that card's an absolute insane card for a Red Broly. No, I don't think Red Broly is going to take over the format by any means, but a lot of times in Red Broly, you had to keep an energy up to be able to use Violent Rays if the matchup called for it. But now you can fully tap out in Red Broly and kind of rely on that King Vegeta Imposing Presence as long as you cut yourself down to 3, which is very easy to do in Red Broly. So not that it's super, important to what we're talking about here, but it was just a thought I was having, and it just speaks on the strength of red in general, where you have a lot of strong free defense and a lot of power you can output on your offensive turn. So again, no surprise. I don't think anyone's surprised that King Piccolo is still here. King Vegeta is doing incredibly well. Red Bardock, not something we're really going to talk about this weekend, unfortunately. I do think that deck is going to be a lot more hit or miss, and the reason I think that is because it's not a deck we haven't seen before, right? Like, yeah, you free play some 15k beaters, you have a 20k barrier that your deck kind of revolves around, but that type of swarmy beatdown is not something we haven't seen before. 15k go wide beatdown is not something that Dragon Ball players are very new to, so that is a strategy that's relatively easy to deal with, whether it's your different floodgates, whether it's Senzu Bean in blue, and that really does make or break a aggressive deck, right? How you're able to aggress. If you're going 15k beat, just going wide on the board with small 15k battle cards, there are a lot more answers to that than, say, going wide with 20ks, 25ks, 30ks in the case of Red Broly, Dark Broly rather. And of course, for Dark Broly, there is the answer of Violent Rays, but that's only tied to red. But you get what I mean, right? If you're just a low to the ground, go wide spam deck, it's not the craziest thing Dragon Ball players have ever seen. We lived through Storm format, right? That being said, I do think Red Bardock Screw's a really good deck, but I think it does a similar thing to Vegex, where where Vegex also spams a wide board, but does it for a bit less energy than Red Bardock probably does. So that's just kind of my thoughts on red right now, why you're not seeing Red Bardock here, why we're not seeing other red decks here, but why we are seeing King Piccolo and King Vegeta, and I definitely expect to continue to see that as the weeks go on. But talking about Invoker, there were 2 Invoker in the top 8 here. Whenever looking at a Florida event, whether it's Gamers, whether it's PPG, anything in Florida, Florida just seems to be where a lot of the Invoker players reside, which is kind of funny. Like, you know, there are a few notable Invoker players down there, a lot of players that have Invoker as part of their gauntlet. It might not be the only deck they play, but it's definitely a part of their gauntlet, and for some players it is their main deck for sure. So yeah, Invoker is something you expect to see down in Florida. Very proficient Invoker players. I don't really expect to see these results particularly, you know, shine on the rest of the format in terms of Invoker being this like really sought after deck. I just don't see it happening, but in Florida, definitely something you want to expect. Then we have Makikabora. So this is a deck that I projected to do very, very well in set 13, and week 1, at least from the events that I covered, wasn't really anywhere to be found. I did get some comments saying that Makikabora did well at other small tournaments, and remember, week 1 we did cover some really small tournaments, and we are covering some smaller ones again here, but again, it's what we have to go by. We're still kind of, you know, as a world, really, as a Dragon Ball and card game community, we're still opening things up. Card chops are coming back. Luckily for Dragon Ball, we have announced some IRL regionals, which is really, really cool. But it is cool to see Makikabora doing something here during week 2 of the set, and I do kind of, you know, project this deck will still do well. I think this deck's actually relatively difficult to build, and I think that might be why it's a little bit slower to the presses. I think once people find the right build in Makikabora, because it's not necessarily a build it yourself deck. Actually, if you look at set 13, there are a lot of cards that can go in this deck, but a lot of cards you should look at and say, is this really best in slot? Is this really what I need to be playing to get my strategy going? Do I need all these different cards that dump Dragon Balls? What's the most proficient number of that? How can I get the most Dragon Balls to the drop area the quickest? How can I do the most absurd things with Makikabora? I think those questions are still being figured out, but I think it's a really good strategy nonetheless, and it's really, really cool to have this type of deck that, you know, players still need to evolve with over time. It's a very different strategy for sure, and it's pretty cool. Then just rounding it out here, we do have a Mecha Frieza. Now, I don't know if this was mono yellow or blue yellow. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one or the other. I don't think blue yellow is more dominant than mono yellow or vice versa, but I do think there's a lot of variety in the way you can build Mecha Frieza, and I don't really expect that to change. I think Mecha Frieza is very, very moldable to the player's preference, the player's choices, what matchups you think you'll see, what you think the meta is going to look like going into a certain event. So I do think that Mecha Frieza could have had a variety of number of builds here. Unfortunately, I don't have the deck list at my disposal, but we do have an OG Broly to talk about here, and that's always really cool. Whenever you see a list like this where it's just something super outlandish, OG Broly has been getting consistent support for a lot of sets now, mostly inside sets. So it is really cool to see that OG Broly is still doing things here or there. We saw it a handful of times in set 12. Really, really cool that, you know, these green decks, while they're not the most powerful things in the meta, unfortunately, it's cool to see they're still playable, and if you dedicate the time to them, you can still go somewhere with a deck like OG Green Broly. But anyways, let's talk about the Carta Magica half case tournament. This was a 38 player event via webcam. This one's so diverse that I don't even know what to do with myself. So for winning this event, we have Dark Broly, and there's another Dark Broly here in the top 8. Dark Broly, not super unexpected, but here's what I want you to keep in mind, right? So this event, compared to what we just looked at PPG, there's a lot more red in the PPG event, which makes sense as to why Dark Broly didn't do so well at PPG, right? It was kind of funny, you know, leading up to the PPG event, you know, my teammates were testing for it. Some of them went to that event. I heard, you know, them and a lot of other players saying that Dark Broly wouldn't be highly represented. Now, I think the format is just very, very wide, so you can't necessarily, you know, expect to see a ton of Dark Broly, a ton of this, ton of that. Maybe at the most you'll see a lot of King Piccolo. I think even King Vegeta is going to be held back for a while by the prices of the tournament pack promos that you need. But yeah, I don't really expect Dark Broly to be a niche deck at all. I think Dark Broly is still pretty popular, just that when there's more red in an environment, I think that's going to definitely, you know, make it a more difficult uphill battle for Dark Broly. But Future Gohan coming in second place, man, I really got to see this list, dude. Man, this is so crazy. I really... You know, I love Future Gohan as a character. I want the deck to be good, and there's a lot of really cool support coming out for the deck in the future. But with that in mind, I'm so surprised that Future Gohan was able to snag second place here. If we could see that list, man, that would be super cool. I'm gonna try to get that for you guys. We do have a blue baby here, and a blue Gohan as well, just jumping down to the 8th place list. It is cool that, you know, this top 8 here does seem to have a pretty interesting spread of colors. I mean, there is at least one deck of every color in this top 8, which is always nice to see. 4th place, Sin Control. Very unusual, just considering we usually see Sin aggro in a lot of events. We haven't seen Sin Control since more like the middle of set 12, but it is nice to see that this deck still can be playable under the right circumstances. King Vegeta, no surprise. Dark Broly, we did talk about it. And then the one Majin Vegeta, cool to see a green deck. Again, I think these green decks are just going to be these players that have dedicated a lot of time to these particular strategies. I don't think green is going to be something that people pick up and say, wow, that's absurdly powerful. But I think if you want to play something in green, whether it's King Cold, Majin Vegeta, Green Gotenks, these different types of decks in green, I think if you dedicate your time to them, really learn the matchups, I think it can be rewarding. I think a big thing there is surprise factor as well. If you can land the surprise factor, as well as just knowing how to navigate each and every matchup properly, I think it's going to pay off a lot if you want to play one of these offshoot kind of rogue green decks. But anyways, guys, that's what we have for this weekend. Very, very cool stuff to look at. It's still, the meta is still definitely trying to figure itself out, right? You see how different this event was compared to the PPG event, and that could be partly location, partly, you know, what decks people chose to take to these tournaments. But anyways, I want to know in the comments below what you guys think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.